first of all, thank you for coming out, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about what I consider one of the most important subjects, because if you're wondering sometimes why this country seems to be going in the wrong direction, sometimes you have to look no further than what your kids are learning in schools. So this is extremely important, as I'm sure you know. I'm just going to briefly tell you, Cornerstone is a family policy advocacy group in New Hampshire. We support the family, and so education is part of that. So I do all of the, a little louder, I do all of the education. I lobby on behalf of Cornerstone, not on all bills, but on many of them. I tend to look for bills that address parental rights, something that's going to improve the quality of education in the schools, and local control. Common Core is one of those education reforms that is dominating the public schools and dominating the subject right now when it comes to education. So it was passed in 2010 in New Hampshire. I should say it was adopted in 2010 by the Board of Education by 4 people. So this is how it came into New Hampshire. It is voluntary. Schools don't have to use Common Core standards, so we do have a few schools that rejected it. However, there is a state statute that requires schools to administer a statewide assessment. That assessment is based on Common Core. What do you think the schools are going to use? What do you think the schools are going to want to use when they're testing kids on Common Core? There are a significant number of problems with the standards. They're dumbed down. There's all kinds of issues with them, but I can't, take 15 minutes and go through them all, but I'm happy to always give that information to you if you ever should need it. When it comes to being legislators and watching for bills that come before the House or the Senate, sometimes there's some bad bills, and sometimes you have Republican names on them. So you have to be very, very careful. If you are free to contact me, I will give you information on these bills as they are presented. Sometimes bad amendments are offered on the floor. They're voted on by Republicans. It's over the Senate, and I have to fight. So be very careful. You have some really good people on the House Education Committee. I'm hoping that they come back. Victoria Sullivan is one of the better legislators on that committee. There's others. On the Senate right now, Kevin Abard would be a good person to watch. But things slip past in the language. Sometimes I'll see something that nobody else sees. And I can tell you that we've had some bad bills passed with Republican names on them as sponsors, because the language is very difficult to understand what this is going to translate into. Watch for testing. The test is what controls the curriculum, and the federal government is paying for our tests. So who do you think is driving the curriculum in your schools? The federal government. So any language that is introduced that has anything with standardized assessments, standardized tests, be very careful on. That is how they control our schools. I want to just kind of go over a couple more things on Common Core, and then I'm going to just briefly touch on school choice. Right now, the standardized assessment that they're using in the school, in my opinion, and I'm no attorney, but I read the state statute and it says that that the state assessment has to be validated. Ask the New Hampshire Department of Education for independent validation studies. From my understanding, and I've asked experts around the country, there are none. This is an invalid test being used in our schools that violates state law. Why are no superintendents in this state questioning why they have to administer this test? This is a question that everybody needs to be asking. Where's the validation studies? It is in state statute that this assessment has to be valid. So one of the other things that parents are doing across the United States is they're refusing to take these tests. These are psychological exams. I talk to medical professionals, licensed child psychologists that tell you not to administer these assessments to these kids, to refuse, and we can do that. So we've had legislation introduced where we want to make sure that parents have the right to refuse these tests, because sometimes the superintendents don't want parents refusing, because then there's threats that you're not in compliance, and if you're not in compliance, you might not get federal funding. We've never seen federal funding withdrawn from a school based on parents refusing. New York did not meet their threshold, and yet I have not heard of any withholding of any federal funds. So we've tried to pass legislation. Of course, that's gets vetoed. But those are good pieces of legislation. Parental rights, whatever puts that into the hands of parents. So the testing is what forces compliance, and we've seen testing change in New Hampshire because parents are saying no, no, no. The DOE is scrambling to figure out how can we get compliance. And one way is not to pass legislation that gives them that right in state statute. Another thing is to kind of change up the tests. So you're going to see tests changing. Again, where's the validation studies? That should be your key question. Because when they're introducing something new, and they brought in the SATs for the 11th graders, because they're thinking, hey, if we offer the SATs in 11th grade free of charge, we're going to get more compliance. The SAT is now controlled by the chief architect of Common Core. It is now Common Core aligned. That's what the SAT is. And yet over 800 colleges and universities no longer use the SAT. There's one monk at St. Anselm's laughed when I asked him about this. I went, do you look at the SATs? And he said, absolutely not. Of course not, it's corrupted. The SATs are corrupted now. Colleges are a little smarter than that. So keep that in mind. I wanted to touch on the federal law that just was passed, led by Republican Senator Lamar Alexander. It's called ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, supported by Kelly Ayotte, Annie Custer, and Jean Shaheen. Over 1,000 pages to replace No Child Left Behind. It was not supported by Frank Ginta because he listened to his constituents and voted against it. Unfortunately, it was passed, and it is over 1,000 pages of federal intrusion into our schools. One of the biggest problems with it says in the language that the U.S. Department of Education, the Secretary of Education, has to approve all state education plans. This was sold to everybody as if this returned control to the state. If it returned control to the state, and then you have to get the U.S. Department of Education, the U.S. Secretary of Education, by the way, was ran out of New York by teachers and parents just a few years ago. If you have to get his approval, how does that return control to our states? This is something that, as you as legislators, need to be aware of, especially when you're talking to your federal level legislators. They just pretty much tied your hands. And now that the rules are being drafted, we are having to fight for some of that control back. I'm sure that you're familiar with that, with how that goes. I wanted to touch on school choice because that seems to be a good platform issue for Republicans, but you need to be very careful with school choice. School choice to us means giving parents an option. We want an option, and it's a good thing, and I don't ever want it to present it as if it's a bad thing. Of course choice is good, but to the reformers, it is a way to control our private and our parochial schools. So I'll give you an example, vouchers. Vouchers in other states. In order to, the money comes into the budget, vouchers go out of the state budget. When it's state funding or federal funding, they're going to control that money. We all know that. That's how vouchers work. So in states like Indiana and Louisiana, where they have vouchers, in order to use that voucher, you have to take the state standardized test. Who controls your state standardized test? The federal government now. When the federal government controls the test, that controls your curriculum. Now that these kids are going to the voucher schools and they are tied to this test, it is now starting to impact. And I hear it from many parents in these states that were once supportive of school choice, they are now against it. And that is not where I want New Hampshire to go. I do not want us to walk that path. So what we have in place is what I consider an excellent alternative. We have the scholarship program, the tuition scholarship program, but you have to watch that closely too. You have to be very careful. We don't want them tying strings to anything. And the way it was set up, that they did a phenomenal job in the state. But I just want to make that very clear because I'm so afraid sometimes that that when we're trying to support choice, that we're not very clear. And I've talked to the federal, our federal legislators about it, that, they want to put it in the federal, but as vouchers. Are you kidding me? Our federal government, there's better ways, tax credits, tax scholarship, or the scholarship program that we have in New Hampshire. That can be expanded hopefully someday when we have a little more of a friendlier governor and friendlier legislature that might be able to expand it to, right now it's for low-income students. Maybe we can expand it to students who are in middle class or to anybody. Why can't anybody have a choice in where they go to school? So, there are ways to be supportive of it. I just want to make sure that you understand the downfalls. I don't want to see us walk into that trap where now we have good conservatives opposing school choice in New Hampshire like they're opposing it in other states. And I see it all the time from good conservative organizations who are opposing school choice because of the vouchers. So, look for things like that. I'll give you another quick example. There was legislation this year to give school choice to Croydon. And if you're not familiar with that, that legislation was vetoed by Governor Hassan. But there was an amendment offered up by 3 Republican senators. And in that amendment, it said that these kids going to, from Croydon had to take this, or had to be accountable to that standardized test. I immediately withdrew support. No. Those kids in Croydon, those kids going to any private parochial school are getting tested. But they're getting tested with an achievement test, not a psychological exam like what we're seeing from the federal government. So immediately went into, you either get that out or you kill that bill, because you might think you're helping the people in Croydon, but if you're tying them to the test, that is exactly why a lot of the Democrats and liberals in the state did not oppose it. They're not going to oppose that. They're thinking, whoo, now I have access to these private schools. So be careful. Watch for the test. That is the component. That is the tool. And so my hope is that we will get a governor that understands the importance of using an achievement test. Achievement test knowledge. These assessments, the national teachers, when they were asked, they came up with a long list of the problems with the Smarter Balance assessment. One teacher specifically said, this looks more like a psychological exam than it does a test. Of course it is. I've talked to medically licensed psychologists that say every student should have written permission to take these assessments. That's how bad they are. I mean, that's what they are. So I don't know if I have any time left. Oh, 1 minute. Again, if you have any questions or concerns, you can follow me on Facebook. You can contact me anytime. I want to help you make good decisions. I want to make sure that you're informed. I have an email list too, but I do tend to send out, maybe a couple emails a week. You might not want that many emails, but feel free to email me anytime. Contact me through Facebook. Call me on the phone. Ask me questions about legislation. I do it for several legislators. And I'm happy to help you understand the language, because that language, I am telling you, there has been bills passed, and I've seen bills come through where if you don't understand what that term means, you can make a bad vote, and I don't want to see that happen. And it does happen. It does happen to good legislators. I've seen it happen to some of my favorite legislators. Not understanding exactly what it means. Oh, it's my time. That's it. If you have any questions, I do have a business card. I'm happy to.